Hey everyone, it's John Little here, and going to read about the Federal Reserve System from the book called The Fourth Reich of the Rich by Des Griffin. And leading up to this, I have gone through the history of the Illuminati, which was, I think, about a 13-part series, and I do recommend listening to that. Very important information, which will help people understand who runs the world, where, the history behind it, how they came about doing it. Those who were responsible for creating all the secret societies, the network of secret societies to carry it out. And then we got into the history of the early founders of the United States and their battle against the Illuminati bankers. And now we're up to the section where we see where they finally lost the war. That is, the founders of the United States and Americans in general lost the war to the Illuminati bankers. And they did that back in 1913 when the bankers had a plot. They carried it out and got the United States government to go along and open up the Illuminati Bank of America called the Federal Reserve System. So I'll go ahead and jump in, and we'll start on page 180 of this book in The Fourth Reich of the Rich. In 9 years since, the fears of Lincoln and Greeley have proved to have been amply justified. The full treacherous story of how the international money barons created the depressions of 1890 and 1907 and reaped a vast financial harvest as a result, and went on to establish the one thing they had schemed and plotted for so many years, that is a central bank in the United States, masquerading under the name of the Federal Reserve Bank. And this is told in graphic detail by Eustace Mullins' book called The Federal Reserve Conspiracy. The book is must reading for those who wish to truly understand the causes of our present hideous financial woes. In his book, Mullins strips aside all of the facades and smokescreens erected by the powers that be to deceive the American people about the true nature of this horribly destructive organization, and provides his readers with thorough documentation to show that the international bankers have used the Fed to fleece the American nation, to plunder and pillage its wealth, and turn us into a nation of slaves. As he points out on page 143, he says, quote, "The American citizen is born owing interest to the private stockholders of the Fed, and when he dies, his children take up his burden. The poet Ezra Pound stated to me that when he came to Washington in 1939 in an attempt to stave off the World War II, he failed because he could find no one in Congress who knew the difference between interest-bearing and non-interest-bearing currency. War debt is slavery." End of quote by Eustace Mullins. The supporters of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 promised that it would stabilize the dollar, that never again would the dollar madly fluctuate and lose its purchasing power. Never again, we were promised, would Americans lose their shirts as the result of depressions or panics. All would now be well on the American scene, and the nation would grow and develop and enjoy unbounded wealth. Yeah. Americans chose to ignore the warning issued by the clear-headed, far-seeing, and patriotic men who cried aloud that the Fed could only lead to a financial catastrophe for the American nation. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge Sr. declared that, quote, "The powers vested in the Federal Reserve Board seem to me highly dangerous, especially where there is political control of the board. It seems to me to contain features and to rest upon principles in the highest degree menacing to our prosperity and to the welfare of the people of the United States." End of quote by Henry Cabot Lodge Sr. Senator Elihu denounced the Fed as an outrage on the liberties of the American people. Senator Elihu said, quote, "Long before we wake up from our dreams of prosperity through an inflated currency, our gold, which alone could have kept us from catastrophe, will have vanished and no rate of interest will tempt it to return. End of quote. President Wilson, in a 1916 speech, referred to the financial oligarchy that controls the Federal Reserve. He said, quote, "A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world. No conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." End of quote by President Wilson. Mullins traces the activities of the Fed from its inception and demonstrates from various authoritative documents and official minutes from Senate hearings and terribly destructive influence which this private banking monopoly has had on the American people. The money manipulators created the recession of 1920 and reaped vast fortunes when they foreclosed on tens of thousands of properties around the nation. It is now clear that the recession of 1920 was just a dress rehearsal for a much greater coup. The Wall Street crash of 1929. In this coup, they gained a stranglehold on American industry, having sold out of the market when it was at its peak early in 1929. They reinvested their vast fortunes in gold and silver. Shortly afterwards, under their direction, the price of both these precious metals practically doubled in value. Then, when the value of industrial stocks had reached rock bottom, they stepped in and purchased vast blocks of shares at 5-10 cents on the dollar. In this way, their fortunes were multiplied up to 40 times in a remarkably short space of time. Just interjecting, that is just absolutely so dirty and disgusting, all the lives that they destroyed and all the wealth that they gobbled up and stole from innocent people that were just trying to make a living. But that's that's the Illuminati for you. One of the greatest fallacies ever perpetrated on the American public is the belief that in the stock market crash of 1929 everyone lost, and that is not so. Everyone who lost money, someone made money. Those somebodies were the people in the know, the elitist bankers and their friends. Let us now look at the clear, irrefutable, and fully documented proof that the international bankers have systematically raided our national coffers ever since they gained full control of our banking system in 1913. It has been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Very true. And especially true when it comes to the way in which the real wealth of the American nation has been plundered and looted and the treasury left virtually threadbare. The following 6 photographs graphically trace the history of the American dollar from the time just a few years ago when it was truly as good as gold to the present time, which was 1981 when this was written, when to all intents and purposes it has been reduced to a worthless scrap of paper, a fiat irredeemable currency. And I should have turned to the page and showed. And I'll actually go through what he has here. And while I'm at it, I'll just try to skip to the page here. That way I can actually show you the images of... Okay, yeah, perfect. Found a page. And these are what he calls plates. And this is plates of the United States currency. What you see there at the top says the gold certificate, representing actual gold coin on deposit in the Treasury, was as sound as paper money could get. The integrity of the entire nation stood behind it, not with fractional reserves, but with gold coin as stipulated. The United States has never been the same since. Then the one below it there, that $2 bill, says the United States note is commonly referred to as the Lincoln greenback. When Lincoln rebelled at paying the international bankers high interest to borrow money with which to pursue war, these were issued as a general obligation against the United States. Not one cent of interest has ever been paid to any international banker or the Fed for their issuance. It has been suggested that his assassination, that is Lincoln's, was linked to the greenback. And then the bottom image there, the $1 bill, the solemn pledge of the face of the silver certificate that has been repudiated by the government in Washington, D.C., shared with the gold certificate, the guarantee of being redeemable with $1 in silver, which was on deposit. The government has now reneged on this. Turn to the next page here. We got the $100 bill. When the Federal Reserve note was first issued, it clearly stipulated that it was redeemable in gold on demand at the U.S. Treasury in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve bank. By 1932, this was no longer the case, but the seed had been planted. Americans were accepting Federal Reserve notes instead of the United States notes, such as the Lincoln greenbacks, and the gold and silver certificates issued by the Treasury of the United States. We have never recovered from this infamous step. You see the $5 bill there. For many years, the gullible public accepted the Federal Reserve note as though it were real money, but only because of the fact that the note clearly stated that it was redeemable in lawful money at the Treasury or any Federal Reserve bank. Another image of the $1 bill. The United States has now reached the final step. We do not have a gold certificate. We do not have a silver certificate. And we do not have a Federal Reserve paper that is redeemable in gold, silver, or lawful money. It simply states, quote, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private," end of quote. The citizen is given no alternative but to accept. While it is true that the Lincoln greenback simply said that it was a legal tender, the credit of the nation stood behind it. Unlike the Federal Reserve note, the Lincoln greenback has never resulted in 1 cent of interest. At the same time, the Fed has systematically looted the Treasury to the point that we are left with only unpayable debt. I'll go ahead and just skip all these other plates that he has there and get on with the text here. It says, before I do that, I'm just going to take a drink of water so I can clear my throat. As of 1978, we are paying the international bankers and a handful of others approximately $45 billion a year interest on our national debt. Yeah, 40 some years later, it's way higher than that now. This money was created by the bankers out of nothing and loaned to us at high interest. Now it's even easier for them now. Before they were able to print all these, print this money on useless paper, just with no value, and just be able to print it out of thin air. Now it's even easier. They just type the digits on a screen, on a computer screen, and loan it to people and then charge interest on it. Absolutely, it's backed by absolutely nothing. Now, if the reader is still not convinced that the dollars he carries around in his wallet have been reduced to a state of worthlessness, he should read the article by Joe Heinemann entitled, quote, "A $1,000 bill worth less than a 10-cent trading stamp," end of quote, which was published in the Central Valley, California Valley Times in May 15th, 1969, and which was inserted in the Congressional Record by the by the Honorable John Rarick of Louisiana on May 22nd, 1969. And he said, and the Valley Times said, quote, "A recent court ruling that affects your money reveals that the Federal Reserve credit and currency, the same you are earning and spending, has no lawful value." And goes on to say that it came about this way. A bank foreclosed by advertisement on a borrower's note, bought the property, the loan's collateral, at a sheriff's sale, sued to acquire possession of a real estate in a case titled First National Bank of Montgomery versus Jerome Daly. Goes on to say that Martin Mahoney, Justice of the Peace, Credit River Township, Scott County, Minnesota, presided at the jury trial on December 7, 1968. The jury found the note and mortgage to be void for failure of a lawful consideration. Also, the jury refused to give any validity to the sheriff's sale. The bank lost. Jerome Daly, the defendant, won and kept his land. The president of the bank, which is within the Federal Reserve System, admitted in testimony that the bank created, he said, quote, created the money/credit by a bookkeeping interest and the so-called consideration for the note and mortgage deed. Also, that no U.S. law or statute exists that gave the bank the right to create money in this manner. Handing down the judgment, Justice Mahoney said that only God can create something of value out of nothing. End of quote. And it goes on to say that the bank tried to appeal the case. The appeal fee of $2 was offered by the bank using 2 Federal Reserve notes. These were likewise declared unlawful and void. The bank agent failed to appear at a hearing on January 22, 1969, and the appeal was dropped. By comparison, a humble trading stamp is worth more than a $1 Federal Reserve note or even a $1,000 Federal Reserve note. The 2 bills differ only in denomination and perhaps engraved design, which has paper and ink value of a fraction of a cent. On the other hand, basic trading stamps, the gold and blue and green, each has the face value of 1 mil, superior to paper money, especially Federal Reserve notes. Trading stamps have redemptive value in merchandise offered in the stamp company's catalog. The Fed's currency cannot be converted into gold or silver in purports to represents and can only be exchanged for more of the same paper or cheap clad copper coins. Excuse me. Fantastic. Remember the foregoing Daly case. A United States court prevented the bank's attempt to redeem its worthless note by seizing Daly's valuable land. The practice works if nobody objects. Do you object to working 23 hours to pay for a new suit or 2 weeks to buy an automatic washing machine, while a Federal Reserve banker needs only to uncap his pen and create and to multiply fiat dollars thousandfold? Fiat money, or fiat means money cannot be converted into metal coins, gold, silver, and so on. Worse, the Federal Reserve System is a private corporation, not a federal agency, despite its name and the 1913 Act that blessed it. End of quote. Now, within months, Judge Mahoney was dead. Yeah, imagine that. He died from a heart attack brought on by what the coroner said were unusual circumstances at the death scene and the controversy he was involved in at the time. End of quote. Yeah, we could pretty well guess what really happened. As the Eagle newspaper, Yakima, Washington, if I pronounce that right, said in its issue of September 11, 1961, quote, whether he be given a whiff of prussic acid or handed a fatal cigarette is not known at this time, but the possibility is certainly more than idle speculation. The international conspiracy which owns and controls the Federal Reserve, which has brought our nation to the brink of the most cataclysmic financial crash in history, is understandably unhappy with the earthly judge whose name is Mahoney. Excuse me. I'm about to lose my voice here. The case and its outcome has sent quivers and spasms up and down the entire trunk lines and tentacles of the conspiracy, as literally thousands of people across the nation have challenged the duplicity of the kingmakers over the thievery of their hard-earned wealth. End of quote by the paper called the Eagle. And I'm going to go ahead and end this video here because I am about to lose my voice. My throat's real tickly. And I'm just going to be coughing the whole time. And I'll pick back up on the next video. So, folks, take care. Have a good day.